All right, hello again. Last demo. I promise it's the last demo. And I'm going to demonstrate how to cut a window mat and how to mat something. So, first of all, you would need to know whatever size your frame is and hopefully pre-cut your boards to size. So for the sake of our demo, we're just using 8x10 boards. So they're just small and ready to go. When you look at your mat board, you want to make sure that you're using the right side of the board because sometimes there's printing or your whites aren't quite right or whatever. So you want to make sure you're using whatever color you've chosen. So we're going to go with this sort of eggshelly color. This one is sort of bright white and I don't want it to be that white. So we're just going to go with this one. Now before you start, you want to make sure that the board is as clean as possible, and sometimes that makes a difference in terms of which one you use. If there's something that's a little more dirty or scuffed, I usually leave that for underneath because nobody tends to see it. So looking at my boards, I'm going to make this one my top board. So you want to make sure that it's fairly clean. If it's not, just using like a regular vinyl eraser to make sure it's as clean as possible before you start. When you decide to prepare for your window mat, you want to work on the verso, so you're working on the wrong side of the board. And we're going to use this lovely idyllic scene, I think it's from the UK, as my background, okay? So this is what I'm working with. So I want to get a sense first before I cut is where exactly I want my placement of the object. So I'll turn it towards the camera so everybody can see where you want it to be. You can do one of two things. You can have it absolutely dead center. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to make it a little bit nicer, you tend to have a bit more visual weight on the bottom of your mat board. So I wouldn't go like that far. That's a bit too much. But you're looking between like a couple of centimeters at the most. You just want to give it a little bit more visual interest. So once you have it roughly decided where you visually want it, you can place a weight down. And then I just like to just ballpark figure out what my sides are going to be, so with the object still in place. And when you cut your mat, in this case I want it to have a little bit of overlap as well. So if you wanted to show the entire frame, you could do that, but in this case I'm not picky. So I'm just gonna plan it out roughly. So I'll do 5.5. Let's see, half. Okay. All right. So 5.5, 5. Okay. All right. So I'll take my weight away. If sometimes I forget, I will just make little notes on the side in terms of what I want my dimensions to be. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to do 5.5 centimeters on each side. You want to make sure you have a pretty sharp pencil to work with. The other thing, again, if you did something that was perfectly symmetrical or you weren't sure, you forgot, you could put top and bottom on as you went. So I'll go with and I'm not making very exaggerated. It's just a half a centimeter difference. But it's fine for the sake of the demo. Okay. So this will make top. Remember? Okay. So essentially what I've done is determined if you were really concerned, you could put your object on and make sure you liked there was some overlap, but hopefully you've measured it okay and it works for your placement, okay? So once you have figured it out, then it's time to cut your mat. So So this is a mat cutter, and it's equipped with a straight blade, and the point is that you want to have a beveled cut. So when it cuts, it doesn't cut straight down, it cuts on an angle, okay? So typically when you're doing mat cutting, you have this extra piece of board that goes underneath. I'm not quite sure why. It definitely just helps keep your mat board more securely in place as you're cutting, but it needs to be moved and changed periodically. You have to sort of keep an eye on it as you go. And yeah, as I said, it helps to keep things in place. Okay, so I've got my board, I'm getting ready to cut. Every time I do this, I always think of Don Snyder, who said when I was learning how to cut mats, he said, always make sure you don't drink too much coffee or else your hand will shake when you're cutting your mats. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put this mat board underneath. Now, we're cutting this way, so I'm just trying to remember the orientation.
You got it right.
I have it right, okay. All right, so what we're gonna do is, when you prepare to cut your mat, if you guys wanna come up and take a look, this is where it gets into detail territory. What I like to do is I like to leave, I put the board in, but I like to leave a little bit of space, and I sort of test it out with the tip of the blade before I start. I wanna see where I'm cutting, okay? So I sort of eyeball it and make sure I'm pretty good before I start, and I do this with all my cuts, okay? So the other thing that I do when I'm cutting, again because of the angle of the blade, is essentially you have to cut it a little bit longer, like a hair longer than the actual points that you've done for your corner, okay? So you're making this a little bit, again, because of the angle of the blade. So this is where this cutting past is the difference between a good mat cutter and an excellent mat cutter in terms of the person doing it, and where the practice comes in terms of how much you actually go past. My habit is that I always cut not enough because I don't want to overcut my corners, and I'll go back after and trim them by hand. But if you trim too much, you'll see it on the other side. You'll actually have cut a bit extra, and your corner will have sort of extra cut lines from it. So I tend to err on the side of caution when I cut my corners. Okay, so again, I'm starting, and it's just beyond the point. And the point, what you want to do, you want to hold down the bar, apply pressure, and you want to go with one swift cut. If you start to hesitate and you jerk, it will affect your cut, and you'll see it. It won't be completely straight. So you have to sort of be confident about it. The other thing that I always do is do 2 passes, because there's nothing worse than after you align your cut and then you realize that it's not completely cut through, and then you have to figure it out again. So once you've cut, I lift up the board, or the support, excuse me. I shift the board underneath, and then I'll change the angle. Okay, so I'm adjusting, making sure it's a little bit beyond but square. I'll test it out. If it's not 100%, if it doesn't hit your line, I mean, it's okay, because you've given yourself a little bit more to work with. So again, adjust your board underneath. I always adjust my board underneath, because I find sometimes if you don't, the blade gets caught in a rut and it will affect your cut. So again, it looks tedious, but it's sort of a case of measure twice, cut once. Well, it's one cut, but you want to make sure that it's cut well. Now this is my last pass.
So rule of thumb is you want the really sort of cutting to the inside is what that would be, right?
Yep. All right, so now we've done our cuts, the moment of truth, where I panic, because I want to see what I'm doing. So this is usually typically how I cut, and it's almost there, but it's not quite, because again, I'm too scared that I'm going to cut through my corners. So what you would do in that case is you can use a scalpel or a blade to find cut. So again, I use a scalpel, other people use a straight blade, whatever it is, to sort of go in on the details. So I'm gonna step away so you can see. So what I'm carefully doing is taking the blade and I'm just poking at the paper fibers. There's hopefully not much left here. Oh, there we go, I popped out too. Okay. So I'm just going in, the camera can see, so I'm just going in with the blade and just gently cutting the paper fibers around it, okay? So the other thing you can do if you want it to be a little bit better, because again, this is where the anal people come in, and you can always tell a good mat cut, if you look carefully, is by the corners, is you may want to go over the corners just a little bit to make them a little bit sharper if you have any stray paper fibers. So you can use an emery board or you can use just a little corner of sandpaper. So this is literally, I don't even know what grit this is. It's sort of like a medium grit, and it's literally just a corner you just rip off, and you can go in. You can literally sand. I'm gonna make a new fold actually. I'm just going in, I'm just cleaning up the corner. If there was something you didn't like sometimes you get little burrs on the edge, you can literally just sweep the sandpaper across. But I like the sharp edge, but again, it all depends where you're at. You want to make sure that they're sort of as clean as possible, okay? So once you've done that, as I said before, make sure everything is clean, ready to go. I've marked the top. Here is the difference between a good matter and a bad one, is that if you're doing this on an expensive piece of artwork, you want to go back in with an eraser and erase the lines on the back. Because what happens is, especially for valuable prints, if you don't do this, your graphite lines will then leave a mark on your original artwork if you have any that's sort of coming through the other, like if your image has any overlap, and you want to avoid that. So again, you're just avoiding any potential damage that you could have with your pieces, okay? So the next step is you need to create your sandwich. So I have my other board ready to go. I mean, you could use either surface, it's fine. I'm gonna go with this side. And I love using Tyvek tape. It's my go-to. You could use one that's a bit wider, it's fine. So the next step is to just put your two pieces together. This has got a little bit of a bend to it, but that's okay. Just make sure these stay in place. That's what I was just thinking. Okay. So just putting that together. Okay. I also like to test my fold before putting anything in. Just make sure this is tight across. So you have your boards ready to go. As I said, I knew that this was the top before, so that's fine. So then from here, I want to do my image placement. So you can look to see where you want it to go, if you like it. I'll set my weight down. And in this case, I'm just going to do a simple T-hinge. Oops. Underneath. Bless you. So I demonstrated the T-hinge before, but in this case, all I'm going to do is I'm going to do it from the front. Okay.
For the sake of our assignments, the 2 hinges, okay?
For your assignment, any hinge you can pick, as long as you do one of the ones that I demonstrated. I mean, again, if this was a real print, I'd put gloves on or use a micro spatula or something. But again, I would also be concerned about the type of hinge I was doing. If this is just a reproduction, wouldn't matter. This other piece of tape is a little long. Just gonna fold it over. Okay, so I've got my hinge and I've got my sandwich. That's it.